I'm going to clean up the shutter case now in much the same fashion that I did the mechanism plate. Paying particular attention to this area around the flash connection where there was that brown stain, making sure that I get rid of anything that's there. That's not too bad. Do the outside of the case, taking particular attention to the thread for the shutter retaining ring. Clean this back surface up. That's what the aperture setting lever ring rides against. And run around the inside at the back. With those threads, they take the rear lens group, of course. That should have the bulk of it done. I'm just checking that everything cleaned up. And there's a bit of staining, so I'm just looking to see what that's like. It's actually oxidisation there of the aluminium by the looks of it, a bit of corrosion. That's neither here nor there, that'll be fine. I'll just run around the top surfaces of the case. Not big as it necessarily needs to be extra clean, but it does give me an opportunity to inspect it closely, make sure that there is no serious corrosion problems there, or indeed any roughness from the something rubbing on it. And where what would be rubbing on that would be the speed setting cam, but there's no obvious sign of serious problems there, so that's good. So that case is clean. That can go to one side. Flip that over, that's getting a bit dirty. So we'll do these pieces here for the diaphragm. That looks quite clean. It's coming away fairly clean. This surface would be against the blades, and so it just making sure that's nice and clean. Any oils on that part would obviously help to stick the diaphragm blades together if it transferred to them. So that plate's done. And the retainer plate. One face of the retainer plate faces the diaphragm blades, and the other face faces the shutter blades. So both sides need to be quite scrupulously clean. Get rid of any oils that are on them. There's a bit of staining there. That's almost certainly some old grease or marks from it. Again, I'm only touching this right in the very edges because the plate will end up with permanent marks from fingerprints that the perspiration just etches into that surface. That's quite clean. That's quite a good example. Probably means the shutter has not been serviced very often, if at all. It's got some quite interesting random scratches on that surface. I've got no idea how they would appear there. They're certainly not wear patterns. They shouldn't be usage marks at all. It's like that component sat at the bottom of a drawer of components that were shook and rattled back against each other. There's a lot of scratches on that surface too. Again, they're fairly unusual, and again they're in a random, they're mostly in this direction, but they're a bit random. Most unusual. Never mind, that won't stop it working correctly. Yeah, the blades. I might find a better pair of tweezers to handle these. I'm holding it at one end gently by its pivot. I swab that surface, swab around the pivot, flip it over and do the same to the other side. Got to be very careful, particularly because of that notch. There won't be much strength at this point. I can't afford to bend the blade, because blades that aren't dead flat are not easy to reassemble. So I'll have a look at this now, see what sort of state it is. I'm just checking the reflections against the light, looking to see if there's any corrosion or indeed any obvious staining from grease that I may or may not have been able to get off. That generally looks very good. Now the blades look fairly symmetrical, and they are fairly symmetrical with the exception of the position of the pivot pins. Now the pivot pin at this end is closer to the centre of the blade. The pivot pin at this end, I'll flip it over so you can see, here it is right near the edge, outer edge of the blade. So they have to be assembled into the diaphragm mechanism the correct way. So I'll line these ones up as I clean them, and once they're clean then they'll be ready for reassembly. And I won't bother showing you me cleaning the others because it's tedious and they're all the same. Alright, time to reassemble this diaphragm. I can gather everything together in one place. Okay, we start with the plate. Now the plate only goes one way up. There are 5 little indents on one side of that plate. Now they go down. They align with the shutter blades, the rivets on the shutter blades. So the plate is on there, and all I have to do is position these 10 blades one on top of another, so the last 4 blades or so are interleaved underneath the first blades that go on, and do it without disturbing anything. So we shall see how I get on. This really goes without a hitch. Here, as I said earlier, the blades are not symmetrical. The pivot pins are closer to the corner on one edge, closer to the centre on the other edge. Now the ones closer to the centre, they are the fixed pivot points. They go into this plate here. It's important that they all go on correctly. If you put one or more on incorrectly, you will end up with a diaphragm which doesn't give you a circular opening, if it works at all. Right, I've got to the point where the last 4 blades need to be inserted, and so the hole in the plates that I've got to put them in is hidden by the blades I've already put on. So I've got to pull that blade back out of the way to expose that position. And the same again. That's it, now we've got to pull 2 blades back out of the way. Of course, these blades are very thin, very light, easy to dislodge because they don't exactly clip into position, they're just sitting in the holes. Now I've got to lift these blades over each other without them catching on these notches, which is tricky. That one's catching. No, it's not going to go. I've dislodged them. This one is a problem. It's not sitting on top, it's trying to burrow underneath. See if I can get that over. No. Right. Start again. This is always a problem. It's more of a problem probably, not sure that any of those are in positions. It will start from scratch. It's more of a problem because of the notches. They make it a bit more difficult to swing the blades over each other, regardless of the fact that they may, at least in theory, reduce the friction once the blades are assembled. Oopsie. You need a decent pair of tweezers to do this job. Of course, having scattered my blades everywhere here, I've got to be extra careful to make sure I'm putting them in the right way around. And you're probably interested to know if there are easier ways to do this job. Well, probably not. I have seen it suggested that you coat the blades with a bit of oil so that they'll stay where they're put, and then you wash the oil out afterwards, but that sounds a bit back to front to me. If it was that easy, you would just not disassemble them in the first place. You would just wash the existing oil away. And that's an option. Certainly you could leave the diaphragm assembled and wash it out completely. You end up using an awful lot of solvent doing that, and it's very hard to encourage all oil and grease contamination to leave, but it does work after a fashion. It's just a poor quality solution, I suppose you'd say. That blade is not around the right way. That could have been a disaster. Alright, now this time attempt to get those blades to lift up over the top without catching on anything. It's looking promising. Just going around, checking that those blades are rotated back towards the centre, and they're all in position. That's good. Now we've got our moving plate which goes on, so that's to go on in a certain position. So I'm checking the position of this plate here in front of me. And there are two screw holes, two mounting screw holes there and there, one right across the other side. Those are my markers, if you like. That's where I know where I am. And I know from experience that I want my holes here just that side of the thing. So now I've got to get this over those pins. That's in position. So now the housing needs to go back on, or the shutter case goes back over this. This goes on in one position. You can see 1, 2, 3 holes here, threaded holes. There where the screws pick up, come through from the other side, there, there and there. So I can align those. Now I'm holding this together. I'll lift off the outer part of my jig, flip it over. I've got to align those three screw holes in the case, and I can see that they are good. And then we have screws that go in there. There were 3 screws. The screws were identical. Nothing's screwed down at this point. The only thing holding it together is the weight of the centre part of the jig, holding that plate down. So I'll drop one screw into position, get it started. Just run it down, I don't tighten it right up. I'm not entirely sure that all the blades have stayed in their respective slots and pivot holes. We can discover that shortly, and if something needs to be nudged back into place, we can do it. So I'll just run that screw down till it contacts that plate. I'll lift this piece off. I'm checking this now. I'm looking to see that each of these pivots is sitting correctly in its slot in the plate, and it looks like they are. So I'm just going to snug those screws down flush, not under any tension. So I can see that the pivots for the blades are all correctly engaged, the fixed pivots, the ones in there. Not so sure about the ones in the slots, so now we can try turning it and see what happens. And I'm watching here to see that we get a circular opening and that everything moves smoothly, that no blades get left behind. There's nothing funny and egg-shaped about that. That's good. So I know there that the diaphragm blades are all correctly in place, are moving smoothly. I can tighten up those 3 screws, check the action again. That's good. So I'll align the holes here in the moving ring up to the holes in that plate. And the next thing that can be done is we can put the aperture setting lever in place, which is here. So I'll give that a little wipe with a bit of solvent to remove any grease. That goes in place. The notches in the top of the case here, that's for the flash sink, that's for the shutter release. This is where the cocking lever goes out. The aperture lever is at the bottom of the case. So I line those holes up. And pretty much the reverse of what I did taking it apart. I'll support that on the edge of the block. Run one screw loosely in. line up my hole here. Turn the other screw in, just do that up loosely. Check that that moves smoothly, and it does. So I can go back and tighten those two screws. There we have it. So now the grease, the oil on there that was sticking those blades together, that's all completely gone. That's moving nice and smoothly, moves to its correct range, and more importantly we get a circular opening because I didn't put any of the blades in back to front. So much for the case.